of Doctor Who companion is a fascinating gig. Like the title part, it's very much a temporary job, and often comes with a baked-in endpoint before you've even filmed your first scene. But unlike the title part, the companions usually get the bulk of the storylines and character development throughout a series, often revolving around their families and home lives. As such, the Doctor Who companion is an essential bit of humanity and audience identification, in amongst all the aliens and bigger-on-the-inside police boxes. This video will explore each of the main Doctor Who companions over the last 60+ years, and their reasons for exiting the show, from behind-the-scenes drama to simply wanting to move on to other projects. First up, Carol Ann Ford. The Doctor's first companion was, of course, his granddaughter Susan. Played by Carol Ann Ford, Susan was the unearthly child that kicked off the next 60+ years of adventures through time and space. But unfortunately for the actress herself, she was rarely afforded the chance to play up Susan's otherworldly qualities, leading to some frustrations. Speaking to Radio Times in 2023, Ford reflected that all of the interesting aspects of the character were, quote, eliminated after the first episode. It was this frustration that led to Ford choosing not to renew her contract after the completion of the Dalek invasion of Earth, though her fondness for the show led her to return several times, including a cameo in the 2025 season, almost 62 years since her journey with the show began. Interestingly, David Brunt's book, The Doctor Who Production Diary, The Hartnell Years, suggests that it might have been a mutual decision for her to depart originally. Producer Verity Lambert is quoted in official correspondence saying that the production team has, quote, no desire to renew Ford's contract, which sounds a bit harsh, but fair enough, I guess. Jacqueline Hill. Jacqueline Hill played Barbara Wright in over 70 episodes of Doctor Who between 1963 and 1965. Without Barbara convincing Ian to investigate Totter's Lane and their mysterious student Susan, we might never have got the Doctor that we know and love. Hill was terrific as Barbara, never a screaming Doctor Who girl, proving herself to be capable of standing up to both the Daleks and the Doctor himself. Details are vague as to why Hill made the decision to leave in 1965, though her contract was due to expire with her final story, The Chase, so it seems that she simply decided to move on. And given that she quit acting soon after to start a family with her husband, it's likely that this played a part in her departure from Doctor Who. She returned to acting in the late 70s, and even returned to Doctor Who in 1980, when she was cast as Lexa in the Tom Baker serial Meglos. William Russell. William Russell played Ian Chesterton, the charming science teacher who also knew how to handle himself in a fight. Ian and Barbara were always keen to get back home to London, and they finally got their wish in 1965's The Chase. William Russell and Jacqueline Hill left the show together, and for similar reasons too, with Russell's contract set to expire at the end of his final story. However, the pair decided that Doctor Who wouldn't be the end of their partnership. Shortly after leaving the Tardis behind, Russell and Hill toured the Terence Rattican play Separate Tables. Indeed, it was Russell's desire to get back to acting on stage that drove his decision to leave, commenting that, quote, I never intended Doctor Who should go on as long as that. I'm always looking for a chance to get back to the theatre. Maureen O'Brien. Vicky is notable for being the first person to be invited aboard the TARDIS rather than being kidnapped. Played by Maureen O'Brien, Vicky became a surrogate granddaughter for the First Doctor, and O'Brien's chemistry with William Hartnell meant that the relationship often felt more believable than the one between the Doctor and Susan. O'Brien had a difficult time on Doctor Who, though, eventually complaining to producer John Wiles about some of the material she was being given. Wiles responded by deciding to write Vicky out of the show while O'Brien was on holiday. This was certainly news to O'Brien, who only found out she was leaving Doctor Who when she read the actual scripts. William Hartnell was reportedly furious about this, and it likely fueled the well-documented feud between the leading man and his producer. Peter Purves. Peter Purves joined Doctor Who in the closing episode of The Chase, becoming a de facto replacement for both Ian and Barbara. Indeed, Purves had complained about Stephen playing the Barbara role in early serials like Galaxy 4. Despite this, he stayed with the show for a year, and the character became more of an individual as time went on. When producer John Wiles was replaced by Inez Lloyd, the decision was made not to renew Purves' contract, meaning that he left Doctor Who at the end of The Savages in 1966. The actor obviously obviously wasn't a fan of this decision, later saying, quote, "I was unhappy to leave, actually. I didn't particularly want it to stop there, but the policy of the program had changed and they decided that they were not going to keep the companions on board for longer than a year. Also, I understand." Purvis struggled to find work in the period after leaving Doctor Who, something he's put down to the bad luck brought about by his ownership of the Toymaker's Trilogic game prop. He discarded the prop and very soon after he found himself as a presenter on the children's show Blue Peter. So maybe the prop was cursed after all. Adrienne Hill, or it could be Adrian Hill. Honestly, I have spent so long trying to find the correct pronunciation of her name, but there is no recordings of this woman's name. So we're going with Adrienne because I think it sounds cool, but it could well be Adrian. And if it is, I'm sorry. When Maureen O'Brien left at the end of The Mythmakers in 1965, she was replaced by handmaiden Katerina, played by Adrienne/Adrian Hill. Where Doctor Who had previously had companions from contemporary Earth or the far future, Katerina was unique because she hailed from ancient Greece. Nobody realised the problem with this until Hill had already been cast and written into the following story, The Daleks' Master Plan. If Katerina had never even seen a light bulb before, how on earth was she going to cope with the sorts of advanced technology that Doctor Who encounters week by week? As a result, Katerina was quickly written out of the Daleks' Master Plan. So quickly, in fact, that her death scene was the first footage Hill filmed after being cast. Talk about a speedy exit. Jackie Lane. While training at the Library Theatre in Manchester, Jackie Lane had a role in the play Never Had It So Good. The play was written by future Doctor Who producer John Wiles, who eventually cast Lane as Dodo Chaplet, making her debut in the closing moments of The Massacre in 1966. This was actually Lane's second attempt at a Doctor Who role, having previously auditioned for the role of Susan. While her previous connection with Wiles earned Lane the role of Dodo, it didn't count for much when he was replaced by Inez Lloyd. Lloyd didn't feel that Dodo's ill-defined contemporary companion was modern enough for his vision of Doctor Who, and duly axed Jackie Lane from the job. Dodo was written out off-screen and didn't even get a proper goodbye, merely sending a telegram to the Doctor to state her intention to stay in London. An unceremonious ending indeed. Annika Wills. Polly was Inez Lloyd's vision of a modern companion for the first and second Doctors, and they picked the perfect actress to play her, Annika Wills. Not only was Wills part of swinging London's Chelsea set, but her daughter was also called Polly. It was Wills' husband, Michael Gough, who finally convinced her to take on the role after telling her how much fun he'd had on Doctor Who while playing the original Toymaker. Wills debuted in 1966's The War Machines alongside Michael Craze as Ben Jackson, with whom she would depart a year later in The Faceless Ones. It was decided that Ben and Polly simply weren't working as companions and they were written out at the earliest opportunity, though they were compensated for the entirety of their contracts, which included the following serial, The Evil of the Daleks. Michael Craze. Polly and Ben were very much the more modern and now version of Ian and Barbara, youthful professionals who hung out in nightclubs rather than classrooms. Michael Craze was cast as Ben, who was envisioned as a character similar to Michael Caine's charming London Lothario Alfie. Ben and Polly were the audience identification figures who smoothed the transition from the first to second Doctors. Without them, the show might have floundered with the loss of William Hartnell, and it's for that reason that Annika Wills and Michael Craze really deserved a better exit than being dumped out of their contracts at Gatwick Airport. Fraser Hines. It's ironic that Jamie's arrival spelled the end for Ben Jackson, given that Fraser Hines had unsuccessfully auditioned for the role a few months before joining Doctor Who in Patrick Troughton's second serial, The Highlanders. Jamie was originally intended as a one-off character, but he made such an impression that the production team decided to keep him on. Hines would remain on Doctor Who throughout the Troughton era, and the role made him a household name. Hoping to capitalise on this, his agent tried to persuade him to leave Doctor Who while the going was good, midway through his third season. In Hines' own words, his agent ultimately proved successful in, quote, nagging him to leave, though he was at least convinced to see the season through by Patrick Troughton, and the pair left together at the end of the War Games in 1969. Deborah Watling. After seeing Deborah Watling on the front cover of the Radio Times to promote the Wednesday play, story editor Jerry Davis and producer Innes Lloyd were inspired to cast her as Victoria Waterfield, a new companion to the Second Doctor. Watling would be joined by her father Jack in 2 serials, The Abominable Snowmen and The Web of Fear. And for Watling herself, Doctor Who was never intended to be a long-term gig, as when she first joined the show she already knew that she only wanted to do a single year. Reflecting on her departure in a 1988 interview, she said, quote, "I knew that I'd like to do a year when I joined. I also knew that they'd have liked me to do more than that, but I decided to go. I thought it was time, so I gave 3 months' notice. They did try pretty hard to keep me on. I was already in the next 6 storylines, but no, I had to go." Watling has also confessed to not being thrilled with her character's tendency to scream the house down at every opportunity, so much so that she actually earned the nickname Leatherlungs. Wendy Padbury. Wendy Padbury replaced Deborah Watling as Zoe Herriot, a supremely gifted genius from the future. Padbury, along with Fraser Hines and Patrick Troughton, were a terrific Tardis team that saw out Doctor Who's black and white era together. But when Troughton and Hines decided to leave the show, Padbury was offered the chance to stay on with the next Doctor, Jon Pertwee, which would help smooth the transition between eras. Instead, Padbury decided to leave with the rest of her Tardis team at the end of the War Games in 1969, and a whole new regular cast was brought in for Doctor Who's big shift into colour television. Nicholas Courtney. Nicholas Courtney first appeared as Colonel Lethbridge Stewart in 1968's The Web of Fear, but he wouldn't become a fully fledged series regular until 1970, when a new Earth-bound, budget-saving format was devised by producer Derek Sherwin. Rather than ditch this approach when he took the reins, new producer Barry Letts and script editor Terence Dix instead doubled down on it, giving us the much-loved Unit family that influences the show to this very day. When Letts, Dix and Third Doctor Jon Pertwee all left the show in the mid-1970s, the Unit format was slowly wound down. The organisation appeared in the 1975 serial The Android Invasion, and it was hoped that the Brigadier would too. However, Courtney's commitments to a stage show prevented his involvement, and the Brigadier vanished from the show. Courtney never fully left Doctor Who behind though, and he returned in the 1980s alongside the 5th and 7th Doctors, as well as a reunion with Elizabeth Sladen in the Sarah Jane Adventures in 2008. Caroline John. Liz Shaw was Unit's first official scientific advisor, but was quickly demoted to lab assistant when the Third Doctor turned up on the scene. This was one of the reasons why Caroline John grew disillusioned with the role of Liz Shaw, with John lamenting that her character, quote, didn't really fit into the prescribed Doctor Who format of action, action, action. This, along with not having the best relationship with Jon Pertwee and wanting to start a family, meant that John was strongly considering leaving Doctor Who as season 7 came to an end. However, the decision was ultimately taken out of her hands. Producer Barry Letts felt that Liz was too overqualified to be a mere assistant to the Doctor, and so the character was hastily written out between seasons 7 and 8. Katie Manning. Katie Manning became Doctor Who's longest-serving female companion up to that point, when she played Jo Grant opposite Jon Pertwee's Third Doctor for 3 whole years. The introduction of Jo Grant and the fun relationship between her and the Doctor solidified the Unit family dynamic that would lend more warmth and levity to the rest of the Pertwee era. Manning made the decision to leave to pursue other acting work at the end of Doctor Who Season 10, a decision that producer Barry Letts was okay with. He had an inkling that Pertwee would be leaving the following year, and he didn't want his 2 main stars to quit the show at once. Manning's departure was the beginning of the end for the Unit family, which began to wind down in the following years. Like many others though, Manning did return for the show's modern era and has always maintained a close connection with the Whoniverse. I've met her, in fact. Elizabeth Sladen. Sarah Jane Smith is the most beloved of all the classic Doctor Who companions, appearing with both Jon Pertwee and Tom Baker between 1973 and 1976. The partnership between Sladen and Baker in particular saw Doctor Who reach the peak of its popularity for the classic era, so it was no surprise that Sladen's departure in 1976 made the newspapers. Publicly, Sladen stated that it was simply time to move on from the role, and that she wanted to make that decision herself rather than being asked to leave. She was also a little frustrated that her commitments to Doctor Who were forcing her to turn down other work. But in her posthumously published autobiography, she stated that she felt new producer Philip Hinchcliffe might have been keen to create his own new companion. Although Hinchcliffe has since stated he would have loved Sladen to stay, the actress stepped aside for a new companion to take her place. The legacy of Sarah Jane Smith would endure all the way through to the modern years though, and she'll always have a special place in the heart of Doctor Who. Louise Jameson. While Elizabeth Sladen graciously stepped aside to open the door to Louise Jameson, the same could not be said for Tom Baker. The Fourth Doctor actor was convinced that he could lead the show by himself and was quite dismissive of both the character of Leela and the actress who played her. He also felt that Leela's more violent characteristics were not right for Doctor Who. Jameson and Baker's working relationship improved slightly after she confronted him on the set of Horror of Fang Rock, but ultimately it didn't really matter, as Jameson had decided early on that she would not be sticking around and would be leaving the show at the end of her first full season. This was problematic for producer Graham Williams, who was fond of the character and hoped to convince Jameson to stay. To this end, he didn't devise a strong ending for Leela, as he figured he'd be able to do some late rewrites to keep the character around. Needless to say, he was unsuccessful, and Leela was lumped with the rather underwhelming ending of being married off to some random Gallifreyan guard, much to Jameson's disappointment, who has since described her exit as, quote, crap. Mary Tamm. Mary Tamm played the Doctor's Time Lord companion Romana throughout the Key to Time season in 1978 and 1979, but found herself experiencing a similar problem to her predecessors Carol Ann Ford and Caroline John. The role of Romana was pitched to Tamm as a genius and an equal to the Doctor, rather than the traditional assistant, but unfortunately the character quickly became reduced to being lesser than the Doctor and getting captured by the villains of the week, precisely what Tamm didn't want her to be. Disappointed at this squandering of Romana's potential, Tamm decided to leave the role after just a single year. Lalla Ward. Mary Tamm is said to have suggested Lalla Ward as a potential new incarnation of Romana. Having previously played Princess Astra in the 1979 story The Armageddon Factor, Ward played a regenerated Romana who had chosen to wear the face of her previous character in that same year's Destiny of the Daleks. Ward and Tom Baker embarked on a tumultuous romantic relationship while filming Doctor Who. These peaks and troughs led to an often uncomfortable atmosphere on set, particularly during production on season 18. Even before the season went before cameras, Ward had decided that she would be leaving partway through, largely because she wanted to exit on her own terms, and while she was still enjoying it. As a result, Romana was written out during 1981's Warrior's Gate, in an ending that Ward has since described as, quote, a nice open-ended departure. I hadn't wanted to be killed off or fall in love or anything tame and silly, she said. I was also delighted I got K9 as company. Well, you can't argue with that, can you? Matthew Waterhouse. Young Doctor Who fan Matthew Waterhouse got the opportunity of a lifetime when he was cast as new companion Adric in 1980. Adric was initially intended as a sort of artful dodger type character, but was often written as a precocious maths nerd, and this inconsistency in the writing of the character led to frustrations on the part of Matthew Waterhouse. On the plus side, these frustrations didn't last long, as Adric was written out of the series at the end of the 1982 serial Earthshock. Waterhouse would have gladly stayed longer, but the producers felt that having three companions was too much, and since Adric hadn't come together in the way they intended, he was the most dispensable. It's said that Waterhouse didn't speak to John Nathan Turner for 2 weeks after finding out Adric's fate, but in the years since, he has come to appreciate how impactful his character's death truly was. Sarah Sutton. Sarah Sutton's guest appearance in The Keeper of Traken so impressed producer John Nathan Turner that he gave Nyssa a full-time slot in the Tardis in the following story. Nyssa quickly became Peter Davison's favourite companion, saying that she best suited his approach to the Fifth Doctor. And so Davison was disappointed to learn that midway through Sutton's second series as Nyssa, she was in discussions to leave Doctor Who. Sarah Sutton and John Nathan Turner had agreed that Nyssa would depart in Terminus, a story that the actress turned out to be hugely disappointed by, after John Nathan Turner had decided that the character had run out of steam. Perhaps in protest, Davison and Sutton broke John Nathan Turner's rule about on-screen affection between Doctor and companion by sharing a goodbye kiss at the end of the story. Janet Fielding. No matter what Peter Davison may think, Janet Fielding's Spiky Tegan was the companion who was best suited to his occasionally huffy Doctor. Fielding was by Davison's side from 1981 all the way through to 1984, when she departed at the end of the particularly grueling events of Resurrection of the Daleks. Fielding's decision to leave the show was influenced by Peter Davison's imminent departure being announced to the press. She decided that, like Fraser Hines and Wendy Padbury before her, she would depart with her Doctor, albeit a few months months earlier. Fellow companion Mark Strickson was also leaving, and so it was decided to spread these 3 departures throughout the year rather than have them all at once. Tegan and the Fifth Doctor were later reunited on screen in 2022's The Power of the Doctor via the magic of the 13th Doctor's sentient hologram. This was something of a return to acting for Fielding after she had left the industry in the 1990s, although she had played Tegan in several Big Finish audio dramas in the years since. Mark Strickson. Introduced as the Fifth Doctor's would-be assassin in Mordrin Undead, Mark Strickson played Turlough between 1983 and 1984. Though after the assassination plot resolved itself in Enlightenment, Turlough was often left with very little to do. But that's not why Strickson ultimately decided to leave. Like Janet Fielding, Strickson decided to leave the show with Davison, and so departed in Davison's penultimate story, Planet of Fire. Both Fielding and Strickson did also return for Davison's final story, The Caves of Androzani, joining his other former companions in the Floating Heads montage during the regeneration at the end of the serial. After Doctor Who, Strickson went on to study zoology in Australia and became a documentary filmmaker, working with the likes of the late Steve Irwin. Nicola Bryant. Did Perry suffer more than any other companion in the classic era? Strangled by the Doctor and married off to Brian Blessed all makes crashing a freighter into prehistoric Earth sound like a sweet relief. Nicola Bryant's desire to leave Doctor Who wasn't fueled by the perils of Perry, however. The actress was worried about being typecast if she stayed in the role too long, and with the producers deciding to write Perry out during season 23, the timing was right. Bryant requested a shocking and dramatic ending for her character, having confessed to finding Janet Fielding's exit as Tegan, quote, rather weak. She added, quote, I loved my violent end. I told John Nathan Turner that I wanted to go out with a bang, and I certainly didn't want a tearful goodbye Doctor scene, or be married off to some hunky Martian. And so Perry's final Doctor Who moments came to pass in October 1986, with the character seemingly being killed. However, this was then undone in the very next story, a revelation that greatly disappointed Bryant. Bonnie Langford. Bonnie Langford was already a household name when she debuted as Mel in episode 9 of Trial of a Time Lord, but her casting was still controversial. Script editor Eric Saywood, for example, was scathing about Langford in a notorious 1986 interview with Starburst magazine. As we've seen from the RTD2 era, Bonnie Langford is a terrific actor, but Mel's paper-thin characterization did nothing to enamor her to fans or indeed the actress herself. After a full series with Sylvester McCoy, Langford decided the time was right to leave, believing there was nowhere to take the character. She had also been clear that she would only stay with the show for a year or two because she wanted to move on to other things. As we all know today, her final serial, Dragonfire, was far from the end of her Doctor Who involvement. Langford was thrilled to return during the Disney era, labelling her original run a, quote, damp squib, and being pleased that she got to do more with her character. Sophie Aldred. Introduced in 1987 as a companion intended to be vastly different from Bonnie Langford's Mel, Sophie Aldred's Ace would turn out to be the last Doctor Who companion of the classic era. Aldred's incredible partnership with 7th Doctor Sylvester McCoy ensured that Doctor Who went out on a high when it was rested in 1989. Aldred had planned to leave during the following season had Doctor Who been renewed, and script editor Andrew Cartmel had vague plans for how Ace would leave the show. However, due to Doctor Who being taken off the air in 1989, these plans never came to pass, and Aldred's contract for an additional season was not taken up. Ace did continue to be a part of Doctor Who via audio dramas, comic strips, and novels. Aldred later returned to Doctor Who in 2022 opposite Jodie Whittaker's 13th Doctor, 33 years after she'd walked off into the horizon with the 7th Doctor. Billie Piper. Billie Piper helped make Doctor Who an overnight sensation way back in 2005, and it was that popularity that played a small part in her decision to leave. Reflecting on Doctor Who in an appearance on Desert Island Discs a few years ago, Piper said that, quote, it made me really famous again in that sort of mainstream fame way that I find really uncomfortable. This fame and the increased public profile was also potentially damaging to her burgeoning career as an actor, and so to avoid typecasting and the harsh glare of the limelight that Doctor Who shines on a person, person, Piper decided to leave the show behind after 2 years to pursue other acting roles in other popular shows like Secret Diary of a Call Girl and more recently Wednesday. Of course, we know that when Billie Piper left the role in 2006, she had already agreed to return for Series 4. Then she came back in 2010 for David Tennant's Farewell, and again in 2013 for The Day of the Doctor, then finally appeared as the 16th Doctor /Rose/Bad Wolf/insert character here in the closing moments of The Reality War in 2025. Freema Agyeman. Billie Piper's Rose was a tough act to follow, and Freema Agyeman had her work cut out for her when Martha Jones succeeded Rose Tyler in the Tardis. Initially joining the show as a throwaway character in the Series 2 finale, the producers quickly realised that Agyeman would be a good fit to play the new companion. And that's exactly what happened. Eventually becoming tired of being treated like second best, Martha left the Tardis to look after her traumatised family after they spent a year imprisoned by the Master. Given that Martha's story is quite self-contained, it's widely assumed that Agyeman was contracted for a one-series storyline, which is why she left the show at the end of Last of the Time Lords. Martha then became a recurring character, crossing over into Torchwood and appearing in 5 of the 13 episodes of Doctor Who Series 4. Interestingly, Agyeman recently confirmed the original plan was for Martha to become a Torchwood regular following her final TARDIS departure in Journey's End, but delays with scripts and contracts ultimately led to the plan being scrapped. Instead, Freema signed on to Chris Chibnall's Law & Order UK alongside past and future Doctor Who stars Peter Davison and Bradley Walsh. Catherine Tate. Nobody, including Doctor Who's producers, expected Catherine Tate to sign on for one series, let alone 2, which is largely why she left at the end of Series 4. Initially, it was assumed that her involvement in Doctor Who wouldn't go beyond the Runaway Bride Christmas special in 2006. But when the production learned that she was interested in doing more, she was contracted for one full series as Donna Noble. Due to the massive popularity of Tate's sketch show and a pending transition between showrunners Russell T Davies and Stephen Moffat, it wasn't feasible for her to do more than that. But just because we all expected Donna to leave at the end of Series 4, did the departure have to be so shockingly brutal? Of course, Donna would make further appearances in Doctor Who in the end of time, and eventually, her tragic ending would be put right in the closing moments of The Star Beast. Karen Gillan. Karen Gillan, along with on-screen husband Arthur Darvill, decided the time was right as an actor to leave Doctor Who behind in 2012's The Angels Take Manhattan. Amy's departure from Doctor Who was a collaboration of sorts between Gillan and showrunner Stephen Moffat. It was a mutual decision, she told the press backstage at the National Television Awards in early 2012. After informing Moffat of her desire to leave, the two, quote, opened up about where they were at with it, and then came to the conclusion that this was the best time to go. Moffat had also told Gillan to let him know as early as possible when she wanted to leave, so that he had enough time to make her departure as effective as he possibly could. And it's safe to say he succeeded. It was certainly the best time to go for Gillan, whose career has gone from strength to strength ever since, with roles in the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the Jumanji franchise, alongside her own directorial efforts. Jenna Coleman. Much like her predecessors Karen Gillan and Arthur Darvill, Jenna Coleman decided to leave when it felt right from a story perspective. However, the timeline of her departure wasn't quite as simple as that of the Ponds. Originally, Coleman was going to leave at the end of 2014's Last Christmas, due to her contract running out at the end of Series 8. In fact, the script that made it to the Last Christmas read-through included Clara's final scene, a dream sequence in which the older Clara imagined herself climbing the spiral staircase that led to the TARDIS in the 2012 Christmas special The Snowmen. However, Jenna Coleman felt that the time wasn't quite right for Clara Oswald to leave the TARDIS for good, and after the read-through, she informed Stephen Moffat that she wanted to stay for one more year. Moffat, who had already prepared for this possibility, gladly accepted, and the rest is history. And hey, it's not like staying for another year hampered Coleman's career. She earned the accolade of longest-running modern companion, and she's barely been out of work since leaving Doctor Who in 2015. Pearl Mackie. Bill Potts truly went through the ringer in Series 10. She almost died saving the Earth from the monks, got shot through the chest, and then got converted into a Cyberman. Such a grueling treadmill of trauma may have been reflective of how Stephen Moffat was feeling when he sat down to write his 6th and final series of Doctor Who. Moffat had intended that, like Coleman, 2015 would be his final year on Doctor Who. That was until his chosen replacement, Chris Chibnall, became unavailable due to his commitment to Broadchurch Series 3. As such, Moffat was convinced to remain for one final year, which also meant that Pearl Mackie's departure at the end was an inevitability, given that Chibnall would want a completely clean slate for his new era of the show. Tosin Cole. Although it was Mandip Gill's Yaz who would become the definitive 13th Doctor companion, Ryan Sinclair was set up as the focus of Doctor Who's 11th series. Played by Tosin Cole, Ryan appeared in 20 episodes and 2 New Year specials, bowing out on the 1st of January 2021 in Revolution of the Daleks. Cole has never given a definitive reason for his departure, but immediately following the show with a lead role in crime miniseries 61st Street and a small role in art house movie The Souvenir Part 2 suggests he was keen to pursue other acting roles. It's also possible that he was just a bit knackered from the relentless pace of making a show like Doctor Who, and that Chris Chibnall wanted to shake up the TARDIS dynamics a little bit. As he prepared to leave Doctor Who, Cole told the press that it had, quote, been an honour to work on such a cultural institution with fans across the world, but that he was, quote, looking forward to having a rest though. Unlike his on-screen granddad, Cole never returned for the power of the Doctor, although perhaps his character quite smartly declined the offer of travelling to an active volcano. Bradley Walsh. When Tosin Cole decided to leave Doctor Who, Bradley Walsh felt like it was the right time for him to go too. After all, Graham O'Brien's story was intrinsically linked to his adoptive grandson, so it was appropriate that they should leave together. As a much-loved entertainer, Walsh was also very in demand elsewhere. However, it wasn't just character and story reasons that inspired Walsh to call time on his role as Graham. Like Tosin Cole, Walsh also commented on the hard work involved in bringing Doctor Who to life, telling Hello Magazine that each season was, quote, 10 months of ramming speed. That's what it is. I'm in my 60th year. It's tough, it's hard, it's relentless, it really is. This ain't an easy gig. Clearly, the hard work wasn't a turn-off altogether though, as Walsh soon returned for Jodie Whittaker's finale, making a surprisingly excellent partnership with Sophie Aldred as Ace. And you know what? It's been a few years now. Where's that Big Finish box set? John Bishop. John Bishop's Dan Lewis was rather unceremoniously dumped back at his tiny house in the opening moments of The Power of the Doctor. However, we're probably lucky that we got as much of Dan as we did. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, stand-up comedian Bishop had to curtail his UK tour. Luckily for him, Chris Chibnall had specifically written him a role in Flux, which kept him occupied while the UK's theatres and arenas were shuttered. But of course, when they reopened, Bishop would have to return to his day job, which meant he couldn't stay on Doctor Who for long. Dan Lewis was always a temporary contract, even if it weren't for Bishop's prior commitments as a comedian and entertainer. The departure of Chris Chibnall as showrunner and Jodie Whittaker as the Doctor made Dan's departure at the end of the 2022 specials a surefire thing from the start. Mandip Gill. Despite an underwhelming start in Series 11, Yasmin Khan really came into her own by the end. Falling in love with the 13th Doctor, Yaz and Mandip Gill as a performer gave us something we hadn't really seen before in Doctor Who. Indeed, that relationship meant that Yaz's departure could only really happen alongside the 13th Doctor's regeneration. Tempting as it would be to see her reaction to Jodie Whittaker turning into David Tennant. Reflecting on Yaz's goodbye in a 2022 interview, Gill said, quote, "There wasn't an awful lot of acting going on. There were real tears. It was just beautiful, wasn't it? The TARDIS scene, that's not acting. That's actually just me crying. It was really emotional, it was beautiful, and it was written so well." Besides the emotional story reasons for her departure, Gill's departure was also tied to the show clearing house before a new, as yet undisclosed, showrunner would take over. Except, of course, that this new showrunner was an old showrunner, Russell T Davies, who wanted his own companions. Millie Gibson. Whatever the truth of the scurrilous tabloid rumours that Millie Gibson was dropped from Doctor Who, we know that she left sort of at the end of Empire of Death, as the Doctor wanted Ruby to spend time getting to know her birth mother. Russell T Davies, on the other hand, was keen to point out that Ruby was not leaving and that her TARDIS departure was part of the overall story being told. Russell T Davies told SFX magazine that Ruby Sunday was always intended to be a 2-year story, saying that, quote, "We were ordered for 2 years of a series off Disney, and we're delivering 2 years, and the Ruby Sunday story literally spans those 2 years." Indeed, Ruby played a very important role in Season 2, leading her own episode and introducing the audience to the villainous Conrad Clark. This is despite the belief of some fans that she was dropped from the show, and that her reduced role in Season 2 was the result of hasty rewrites. Whatever the truth of the matter, Gibson was never planned to stick around for very long, and considering Ncuti Gatwa's last-minute decision to leave Doctor Who, Gibson likely would have been forced to leave with her Doctor even if she had wanted to stay longer. Varada Sethu. At the end of the reality war, Belinda Chandra finally got home, albeit home in a completely new reality, to her daughter Poppy. Varada Sethu has since defended this rather out-of-the-blue ending as, quote, perfect and beautifully tied up. However, the reasons for her exit are a bit messier. An accidentally released official image of the Doctor and Belinda dancing in an apparent alternate ending for the reality war implies that the plan was for her to return in Season 3. It seems, therefore, that Varada Sethu's departure from Doctor Who was an unfortunate byproduct of Disney failing to order a third season of the RTD2 era, which also prompted Ncuti Gatwa to leave. And so she was likely released from her contract to pursue other opportunities. And there you have it, folks. But why stop there? You've heard about all the companion actors, but what about the Doctor themselves? Check out why every lead actor left Doctor Who. In the meantime, I've been Ellie for WhoCulture, and in the words of Riversong herself, goodbye, sweeties.